Hi, fifth graders. We're here for our Fantasy Book Club session 6. This lesson is called Here Be Dragons, and we're going to think metaphorically. Some of you may have seen maps similar to this before in old social studies books or just old books in general. These maps are what maps originally looked like when people would ride ships and have to go out into open ocean and actually draw these maps and be map makers. Now, what the map makers used to do is they would include these type of dragons or monsters on the paper. A lot of times in open ocean or sometimes on land. And these didn't necessarily mean that they actually saw a dragon or some kind of sea monster, but it symbolized trouble for them. And that trouble could be like a storm. It could be maybe another ship came and attacked them. It could be that the water currents there are just really dangerous. But basically, those just meant that there was trouble there, that they faced trouble. And they would write this phrase, here be dragons, on those maps. And that basically just meant, okay, you're going to face some dragons here. But remember, these are not literal dragons, they're not actual dragons. They are metaphorical dragons. Or those dragons are just a symbol for that trouble that they faced in that area. So in our fantasy novels, we are going to be looking for different dragons that our characters are facing. Some of these dragons might be literal, like actual dragons or actual monsters or villains. However, others are going to be metaphorical, meaning that when I say the word dragon, it's going to mean, what trouble are they facing or what conflicts do they have? And sometimes those might be inside of your character. So something they're struggling with inside. Then we're going to consider whether these conflicts are becoming themes in the story. Let's do this work today by first reading a book that you may have read before called The Paper Bag Princess by Robert Munsch. We're going to be reading this book, and the main character in here is called Elizabeth. And I want you to be thinking about, what are Elizabeth's dragons in the story? Now, I know she has a literal dragon, like an actual dragon that she faces, but go deeper than that. I want you to think of, what conflicts does Elizabeth face?
Today's story is a classic by Robert Munsch. It's The Paper Bag Princess, illustrated by Michael Marchenko. To Elizabeth. Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. Unfortunately, a dragon smashed her castle, burned all her clothes with his fiery breath, and carried off Prince Ronald. Elizabeth decided to chase the dragon and get Ronald back. She looked everywhere for something to wear, but the only thing she could find that was not burnt was a paper bag. So she put on the paper bag and followed the dragon. He was easy to follow because he left a trail of burnt forests and horses' bones. Finally, Elizabeth came to a cave with a large door that had a huge knocker on it. She took a hold of the knocker and banged on the door. The dragon stuck his nose out of the door and said, "Well, princess, I love to eat princesses, but I have already eaten a whole castle today. I am a very busy dragon. Come back tomorrow." He slammed the door so fast that Elizabeth almost got her nose caught. Elizabeth grabbed the knocker and banged on the door again. The dragon stuck his nose out of the door and said, "Go away. I love to eat princesses, but I have already eaten a whole castle today. I am a very busy dragon. Come back tomorrow." "Wait!" shouted Elizabeth. "Is it true that you're the smartest and fiercest dragon in the whole world?" "Yes," said the dragon. "Is it true," said Elizabeth, "that you can burn up 10 forests with your fiery breath?" "Oh, yes," said the dragon, and he took a huge, deep breath and breathed out so much fire that he burnt up 50 forests. "Fantastic," said Elizabeth, and the dragon took another huge breath and breathed out so much fire that he burnt up 100 forests. Magnificent, said Elizabeth, and the dragon took another huge breath, but this time nothing came out. The dragon didn't even have enough fire left to cook a meatball. Elizabeth said, "Dragon, is it true that you can fly around the world in just 10 seconds?" "Why, yes," said the dragon, and jumped up and flew all the way around the world in just 10 seconds. He was very tired when he got back, but Elizabeth shouted, "Fantastic! Do it again!" So the dragon jumped up and flew around the world in just 20 seconds. When he got back, he was too tired to talk, and he lay down and went straight to sleep. Elizabeth whispered very softly, "Hey, dragon." The dragon didn't move at all. She lifted up the dragon's ear and put her head right inside. She shouted as loud as she could, "Hey, dragon!" The dragon was so tired he didn't even move. Elizabeth walked right over the dragon and opened the door to the cave. There was Prince Ronald. He looked at her and said, "Elizabeth, you are a mess. You smell like ashes, your hair is all tangled, and you are wearing a dirty old paper bag. Come back when you are dressed like a real princess." "Ronald," said Elizabeth, "your clothes are really pretty, and your hair is very neat. You look like a real prince, but you are a bum." They didn't get married after all.
Okay, so as we were watching, I kept some notes about what Elizabeth's dragons were, whether those were literal or metaphorical. So the literal dragon that she faces is the actual dragon that smashes her castle and takes Prince Ronald away. Of course, she overcomes that challenge and overcomes that conflict by finding a paper bag to wear. She goes and she tricks the dragon into getting really, really tired, and then she's able to get to Prince Ronald. The metaphorical dragons, or the conflicts that are inside of her, I thought of a couple of them, and maybe you thought of more too, um, or the same as me. So, first of all, I thought about one conflict inside that she has to deal with is being homeless. So, when the dragon smashes her castle and burns off all her clothes and takes Prince Ronald away, she needs to figure out, okay, how am I going to handle this situation? So she puts the paper bag on, and then she has to think of a strategy in order to get Prince Ronald back. Then the next one, which might be the more important metaphorical dragon that she has to deal with, is how Prince Ronald treats her at the end. So she goes in, she does all this stuff to save him, and then she gets inside of the cave where he's being kept, and he says, "Nope, you don't look like a princess. Come back when you actually look like a princess, and then I'll go with you." And she says, "Actually, no, I'm not going to deal with that. Prince Ronald is not actually what he was all cracked up to be." So she has to deal with that. So, in thinking about that, I want to take it a step further of, okay, so what are some possible themes based on those metaphorical dragons, those internal conflicts that Elizabeth had to face? What are some possible themes or lessons from that story that we as the reader can take away? So, first that I wrote down was people are not always what they seem. I saw that in this in the book because Prince Ronald, in the beginning, he seemed like a nice enough guy and a pretty standard prince. But then by the end, he was really rude to Elizabeth. And even after she had just saved him. So he was not always, or he was not what he seemed. And also, another one I wrote down was it's important to make wise choices about your relationships. That's kind of the same thing that I said before, the same theme, but just kind of a different way to say it. That Elizabeth needs to be careful about who, she's in a relationship with and who she wants to marry because they're not always what they seem. So, what I'd like you to think about in your own fantasy novels is what are the dragons your characters face? Now, remember, dragons can be literal, like actual physical people, characters, or situations that cause conflict for your main character, or they can be metaphorical, meaning when I say the word dragon, it's more of a symbol for those conflicts, those internal conflicts inside of your character that cause change in your character over time. And then finally, do these internal dragons lead to possible themes in the stories? And what are they? So remember, dragons can be literal or metaphorical. Think deeply about the metaphorical or internal dragons your character is facing. Write those things down and begin thinking about some of those possible themes in your story. Write those things down in your reading journal and we will discuss them in book clubs.
Hi, 5th grade. It's Mrs. McMillan here with your McMillan Math Minute, or 10. I want to go over the target with you. I understand the 2 types of division, sharing and grouping. This is going to match up with your blue pages that are Unit 5, Module 4, page 103 and 105. Let's take a look at that so you know which pages we're talking about. The first one is called sharing and grouping, multiplication and division. And the second page we'll talk more about at the end of this. Looks like this, and it says operating with fractions and whole numbers. So those are the 2 pages that this target will go through. So once again, the target today is I understand the 2 types of division, sharing and grouping, from pages 103 and 105. So we've worked a lot with this in 3rd and 4th grade with sharing and grouping problems with whole numbers. When you are working with fractions, you have to think more about the story context to really understand. It really matters what the story context is. And so for this, you will need to think about those. So let's start with an easier problem. Let's start with some whole numbers. Often when we're using easier numbers, then it's easier to learn those more difficult tasks. So up here, I've written a problem. It says I have 12 carrots and 3 horses. How many carrots does each horse get? So I know that I have my 3 horses. So I'm going to draw my horses, although I'm just going to make them circles for today. There are my 3 horses. And then I know I take these 12 carrots and I can give them out, or I can share them to my horses. So in 3rd grade, it would look like this. And I would go through and I would give each horse their carrots until I used up all of my carrots. And I would know that that meant that each horse would get 4 carrots. 4 is my answer. 4 tells me how big each group was. This is a sharing problem. Now let's take a look at a problem using fractions. I have 1/3 of a cake. There are 4 people in my family. How much does each person get? Again, I can think about what I know and how I can do that. So if I'm going to draw a big sheet cake here. And I know I have 1/3 of that cake. So I have 1/3 of my cake. 1/3 is my dividend. I then am going to cut this 1/3. I'm going to shade that in a little bit. Into 4 equal pieces so that each person gets a piece. We can look at that as 1 person, 2, 3, and 4. So each person here would get a piece of the cake. Each person then gets 1 out of 12 total pieces. So my total, or my answer, would be 1/12. 1/12 of the cake. When you are doing a fraction divided by a whole number, when you do a fraction divided by a whole number, it is a sharing problem. Let's go ahead now and look at a grouping problem. Here's a grouping problem using whole numbers. If I have 12 carrots, and I'm going to give 3 carrots to each horse, how many horses get carrots? So I know that if I have 1 horse, I can give them 3 carrots. But I have 12 carrots to give away, so I have to keep going with that until I give away all of my carrots. I've now given away 6 of my carrots. 9 of my carrots. And 12 of my carrots. I've now given away all of my carrots. If I'm thinking about this, then I know that I can give 4 horses their carrots. So I have 12 carrots total, which is my dividend, my total number I'm dividing. I'm putting it into groups of 3, and I can give it to 4 of my horses. Let's look at a second problem using grouping. This time, we're going to use this problem here. I have 4 cakes. If I give 1/3 cake to my friends, how many friends get cake? Again, I'm going to think about how to do that. I know that 4 is the total amount, so that is my dividend. I am doing a whole number divided by a fraction. I'm going to start by drawing out my 4 cakes. Here are my 4 cakes. And now I'm going to divide each of those cakes into thirds. Because I'm giving, each friend gets 1/3 of the cake. So that tells me I can give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've given 6 friends 1/3 of the cake. And if I count out all of those thirds, I end up with 12. 12 friends can get a slice or a third of my cake. 4 divided by 1/3 equals 12. 12 of my friends can get a cake. I hope that this helps you understand sharing and grouping problems for division with fractions. This might be a video that you stop and practice some problems and come back to. I do want to go over for a minute the second page because it's like a choose your own adventure. So if we look, let me get myself set up here, at the second page, it looks like this. Up here, it goes over that success criteria again. In the parentheses here, you can see that you get to choose by circling one of these fractions. What I want you to know is that the 5th grade standard only has you using unit fractions, meaning there's a 1 in the denominator. So 1/2 or 1/3. If you choose 3/4 or 2/3, that is a 6th grade standard. So go ahead and just choose one of the unit fractions to practice. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is this says an expression. So you won't have 1/3 divided by 4. You will equal something. It won't have an equal sign and it won't have an answer. So you'll just be doing the expression. You'll draw a picture and then you will solve it. Those are the 3 steps you need to do. You circle one of the unit fractions, you draw a picture, an expression, and solve it. Again, if you need more help, please contact Mrs. Leibold or myself, and we'd be happy to meet with you and go over this with you. Remember, this is all new learning, and it's going to take practice in order to get better. I hope you have a great day. Keep working hard, and we miss you. See you later.